All right, well, let's move on to the war on whistleblowing. A war that in the last few days has actually tilted in favor of those advocating for more protections. It's certainly been a long time coming, but last week Congress approved legislation making it safer for federal employees who want to report wrongdoing at their jobs to do so without fear of retaliation. I want to talk more about what the new law does and does not include with RT Web producer Andrew Blake. So, Andrew, that's the first question. I mean, who's included in these new protections?
Okay, well, we're looking at a lot of federal employees. Of course, not all of them. That would be too convenient. But one big expansion that we're seeing here is that workers under the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, finally have whistleblower coverage, which obviously makes sense. But again, we're looking at an agency that's still rather in its infancy. It's only been around since a little after 9/11. So it makes sense, and we can finally, I'm very curious to see what kind of things are going to come out of that, because that's one of those agencies where you are getting not people from within the federal sector, but people who are subjected to treatment by the TSA every single day, and it's kind of something that people aren't too crazy about. I don't know if you've been to an airport lately, but you're not going to find too many people who are there happy with what the TSA is doing from the public-facing side of it. So it might be really interesting to see now that TSA employees can actually come out and talk about abuse and misuse happening within the agency itself, what actually is going to serve. So are they going to go to Congress and start complaining? Are they going to go to their superiors and start putting in reports? We can hope, but they're one major group that we're going to start seeing, ideally, a little bit of response from items that they think are going to need a little bit of media attention. But like I said, of course, not everyone is covered. I know the Senate had tried to include provisions to protect people with national security clearances.
Yeah, I mean, this is very interesting because House Republicans not only, didn't include it, they flat out blocked these two parts of the legislation. And what you just said, which is the national security intelligence workers. But so what's their reasoning here?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not too sure, but one thing that we do know is that President Obama has supposedly saved the day, and he's issued a little policy directive that will provide some sort of safeguard for these intelligence community workers who want to go out and speak up. But no, the Congress themselves actually decided that that's not the best thing. So we have the executive branch saying one thing, legislative branch saying another. Is it still a victory? Absolutely. But it's not coded in there yet. It's still just a minor win in the fight to actually have public employees, actually working for the government, be able to complain. And in the intelligence community, that's really where we're seeing the most people not actually just coming out and complaining, but the most people actually being prosecuted for that too. I mean, if I ask you who is probably the most harshly prosecuted whistleblower in the United States right now, you might say
Julian Assange.
Oh, well,
I guess he's not
States.
in the United States. Bradley Manning.
Yeah, of course. And
right.
Bradley Manning was an Army intelligence officer who has been detained for over 900 days now for blowing the whistle.
Much of that in solitary confinement.
Absolutely, in conditions considered torturous by the United Nations. And for what he did, allegedly, was blowing the whistle on war crimes and actually saying, okay, I work for Uncle Sam. I'm in the Army. The Army is doing something. I'm not too crazy about it. I'm going to blow the whistle.
And it's against the law, yeah.
And it's against the law, yes. Yeah.
So I'm going to blow the whistle. And what's this? Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
So I mean, do you think do you think that under this new law, it could be argued in a court of law that Bradley Manning should, be freed? I
mean, it could be argued. It should have been argued all along that when you have the State Department saying that he hasn't done anything that's actually caused massive damages like the prosecutors want to say, absolutely. But is it really going to happen? It's a good question, especially, like I said, when we have Congress saying one thing and the president saying another. It's definitely a step in the right direction. Another group that I think is a really interesting way to look at this is FDA employees are covered under this. However, private businesses tied with the FDA, like independent food producers, they don't necessarily have these protections right now.
They can make their own rules regarding whistleblowing, or?
Well, I mean, they can. Some of them do, some of them don't. But whereas before we saw the FDA, or at least now, if you work for the FDA and you see problems within the food industry, you can blow the whistle now, and you will, at least under this legislation, be covered. But if you work for some mom and pop place who has a contract with the FDA, you're not necessarily going to get that protection. If you step up and say, okay, there's a lot of stuff going wrong here, they can still retaliate against you. But on a bigger level, on a federal level, there will be some protections now once Obama signs this into law. But the fact that we still need a law in order to tell people that it's okay to go
to come
forth with the
forward and
truth.
report wrongdoing. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, I think you brought up Bradley Manning, so I think it would be good just really quickly to mention Julian Assange, because I think today it's 5 months that he's been holed up at the Ecuadorian embassy
still without charge
in the UK.
Yes.
No charges. Afraid of going to Sweden for questioning on sexual allegations because he thinks he would then be, brought to the United States to face charges.
Yeah.
What's the bigger picture? I mean, does this new law, would it protect someone like Julian Assange, who hasn't even blown the whistle, has just provided sort of a medium by which others can blow the whistle?
Isn't even an American citizen either.
Right.
So what they are going to do to him is a question I think we're all eventually going to find out. But like we said, we have the presidential policy directive that's going to supposedly provide some sort of safeguards for people within the intelligence community, which is great. But in the meantime, we still have the Congress and we have the president saying different things. So are these protections actually going to happen? And if you look into the intelligence community, that's where we're seeing the biggest prosecutions in these cases. Like, I know just last week, I saw John Kiriakou receive a civic duty award for blowing the whistle on CIA waterboarding in Afghanistan. And it was in a room maybe 120 people, and they started saying, well, if we passed around a petition right now, do you think we can get the president to pardon you because you talked about whistleblowing or talked about waterboarding and actually acknowledged it? And it's kind of like a flat-out no. Like, no one thinks that's actually a reality. You can go to Thomas Drake blowing the whistle on the NSA, and a couple other NSA whistleblowers have been under fire by federal prosecutors lately. So it's it's a good step in the right direction.
It's really interesting, and I think too. I mean, you make a good point about the Congress says this, the president says this. We have these three branches of government, but what actually goes into effect remains to be seen.
As if we can make it a bigger stalemate, I think we
yeah,
have.
Yeah, absolutely. RT Web producer Andrew Blake, thank you as always
Thank you.
for breaking it down.